About 14 months after Custer's last charge on the Little Bighorn, while our force was on Tongue River, I was included in a detail ordered on a scout into the Bighorn country and also to act as escort of a few officers who wished to see the battlefield where Custer and his men met death. Now, some say that the distance from Tongue River near the mountains to the battlefield does not exceed 25 miles. Others place the estimate at 30 and none over 35. But we, after 2 long and hard days' ride from the head of the Little Horn in the mountains, a point nearer than Tongue River, at present General Miles' headquarters, carefully compute the distance to be at least 45 miles. Beginning with the noble tableland upon which we stood, the ground gradually and gently fell towards the river, straightening out as level as a floor, and with both sides clearly defined by the sparsely shaded streams and the bluffs. Beyond the water appeared the rugged embankment, extending from the south, where Reno held his force while Custer and his command were struggling in the jaws of death, to the limit of vision on the north, standing perpendicular, save an occasional gap through which some trickling stream contributed its mite to the general volume of the Little Horn, or through which an entrance to the fords are made, and through which we must ride if we would gain the other side. Still farther back, towards the Rosebud, the silent, timberless, sandy Wolf Mountains loomed high, casting a mild and pleasing shadow over the landscape, while at the other extremity of the valley, the gradual divides, rich with verdure and bright-hued with full-blown flowers, completed as beautiful a scene as the eye of an artist ever rested on, or the hand of a master ever transferred to canvas. At last, after a weary march, and not without the many little incidents which go to liven up, and sometimes to still further depress the drooping spirits of man and beast, we arrived at and entered the site of the old Indian village, hard by which General Custer and his men were trapped and slaughtered. This camping place was about 4 miles long, half a mile wide, and located by the riverside upon a depressed tableland with a thin growth of timber, which at one time extended all over the bottom. But the felling of the trees by the squaws to secure the bark for food for ponies during the winters had left the central portion of the strip almost barren. At the southern side, we passed through a dense, bushy grove covering 3 or 4 acres, where the squaws and papooses were concealed when Custer approached, and until the cavalry were securely trapped. Beyond this, the ground presented a strange spectacle. Teepee and lodge poles were as thick as they could stand, while all about camp, equipage and hides were scattered in confusion. An outstanding feature was the great quantities of leggings lying about, and the only explanation is that the Indians discarded them for articles of clothing taken from the dead soldiers. Farther down, we saw 6 burial scaffolds, and on the ground beneath them were the bones of as many Indians, the skull of one of them having been pierced by and still containing a rifle bullet. It was nearly dark when we reached the lower ford, about halfway through the abandoned Indian village, where we camped for the night, wet, cold, hungry, and greatly fatigued. Supper was quickly prepared, and after eating and taking a short smoke, we spread our wet blankets on the ground and all turned in for the night, but not to sleep, for coyotes and wolves kept up their horrid din as though angry at being deprived of their accustomed nightly hunt for scraps of muscle and flesh on bones scattered about. We had been lying down some time when a yell rent the air, and Jack Healy sprang to his feet, shouting, "Snakes!" Jack, while nearly asleep, had felt a cold, slimy something crawl over his face, and then followed the warning cry of "Snakes!" We were soon on our feet, quickly replenished the dying fire, and with sabers in hand began to hunt for the unwelcomed intruders. No snakes were found, but we did find lizards, hundreds of the slimy green things, and the slaughter continued until the last one found was dead. Then we tried our blankets again, but Dread of another attack by the repulsive things did not allow us to fall asleep. Soon another man felt one of the reptiles crawling over him, and then all arose, and there was another slaughter of lizards. Sleep was out of the question, so we lay and sat around until morning dawned. After a hasty breakfast, we passed on over the battlefield where a little over 1 year ago, General George A. Custer and 300 brave troopers of the 7th Cavalry, while in the line of duty, were massacred by between 3,000 and 4,000 Indian warriors under the immediate command of Sitting Bull. Not one of the hostiles having part in that massacre has ever been called to account for the awful deed. Worse than that, some of these very same savages are now fed and supported by the government they fought against, and are the forced associates and companions of members of the 7th Cavalry. The bodies of our dead had never been properly buried. All these months had passed, yet the little band whose brave deeds of heroism will ever remain a matter of history have not received decent burial. Their bones, divested of clothing by the heartless and brutal savages, and of flesh by wolves and other animals, lie bleaching on the ground where they fell, a said result of the failure of Major Reno to give expected support. 2 days after the battle, a small detachment was sent to bury the bodies, but not one was given proper interment. Graves were shallow, and dirt thrown but sparsely over bodies was soon washed away by rains or dug away by scavenger animals and birds. Crossing the Little Horn, or Custer River as it is now called, to the east side, a well-defined trail leads up the gradual slope 1/4 mile in length. The ground is covered with sagebrush, coarse grass, prickly pears, and is destitute of rocks or timber. We reach the summit and see a ravine with gentle sloping sides, near 1/2 mile in length, and free from rocks, timber, or anything that could furnish shelter. Nearby are the uncovered remains of 18 men in 6 piles, with a piece of teepee pole sticking in the ground at each pile. Upon one of these tombstones, as it were, hung a white sombrero, relic of a member of the 7th Cavalry, with 2 bullet holes through it, and a long cut as if made with an axe. And nearby we found an axe with a dark stain on the rusty blade, it having undoubtedly been used by the squaws in their frenzied mutilation of the wounded and dead of the Curtis command. Near here were the carcasses of 2 horses. To the north, a few yards away, were heaps of bones so mixed that it was not possible to count the number of persons represented. A little farther on, and another heap containing the bones of 3 men appear beside the skeleton of a horse, evidently killed to be used as a breastwork. A heavy trail runs along the crest of the divide, which separates the river from the ravine, and it was thickly strewn with whitened bones, rotting equipments, and clothing. 300 yards up the trail, we came upon the knoll where Custer and the remnant of his command made their final stand. We picture him in our mind as he coolly loads and fires with the rest of the men, frequently glancing over the bluffs to see if Reno, whom he had so urgently requested to hasten to his support, is at hand. Reno's utter failure to respond is generally condemned. This elevation of the battlefield is but a little above the divide of which it is the terminus, and is apparently a commanding position, but the enemy were too powerful for the small body of troops who were there. On top of the hill where Custer was killed, we saw the skeletons of 4 men and horses, among the latter being the skeleton of the horse that Custer rode. We returned to Tongue River with the picture of that field of death vividly impressed on our mind, and wondering if Custer and his men would have perished had Reno tried to fight his way to Custer's rescue. Trumpeter Martin says Reno could have gotten there, and Trumpeter Martin knows, as he is the man Custer sent back to ask Reno to hurry to his assistance. Trooper Amy Frank Mulfiord.